Sometimes the cruelest words are spoken across a dinner table. The restaurant was warm with golden light and the soft clinking of silverware against porcelain plates. The kind of place where couples celebrated anniversaries and businessmen closed deals over $80 steaks and glasses of Napa Valley Cabernet. Sophia Bennett sat quietly at the end of a long table while Ryan Bennett leaned back in his chair, laughing with his friends like he owned the room. His voice carried above the low jazz music drifting from the speakers. Everyone at the table watched him the way people watch the loudest person in the room. Ryan lifted his glass, swirling the wine slowly, and then glanced toward Sophia with a crooked smile that never reached his eyes. "Let's be honest," he said, his tone casual, almost playful. "My wife's ugly." The words hung in the air for a second before the table erupted in laughter. One of his friends nearly choked on his drink. Another leaned forward, studying Sophia like she was suddenly part of the entertainment. Ryan chuckled like he had just delivered the funniest joke of the night. Sophia didn't move. Her fork hovered above a plate of food she hadn't touched. The lights above the table reflected softly against the glass of water in front of her, trembling slightly as someone bumped the table during the laughter. Ryan leaned forward again, lowering his voice but not enough to hide the cruelty in it. "I mean, look at her," he continued. "How did I even marry that?" The laughter came again, louder this time. Someone muttered, "Man, that's cold." But they were smiling when they said it. Sophia kept her eyes on the tablecloth. She could smell the grilled steak, the butter, the wine. She could hear every laugh like it was echoing off the walls. For a moment she wondered if anyone else in the restaurant could hear it too. Ryan reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $20 bill, and dropped it beside her untouched plate. The bill slid slightly across the white linen like it had been tossed there without thought. "That should cover your dinner," he said as he stood up, straightening his jacket. "Eat alone. I'm done." His chair scraped against the hardwood floor as he pushed it back. None of his friends tried to stop him. In fact, one of them raised his glass and said, "Man, you're finally free." Ryan laughed again, clapping the man on the shoulder as he walked away from the table. The sound of his footsteps faded toward the exit, followed by the faint jingle of the restaurant door opening. The table slowly returned to conversation, though quieter now, as if the show had ended. Sophia remained in her chair. The $20 bill rested beside her plate, the edges slightly curled under the warm lights. She stared at it for a long moment before finally lifting her eyes toward the empty doorway Ryan had just walked through. Outside, through the tall windows of the restaurant, the city lights of Manhattan glowed against the dark night sky. Sophia slowly placed her fork down on the plate. The steak in front of her was still untouched. And somewhere deep inside the quiet that followed, something in her life closed like a door that would never open the same way again. The laughter at the table slowly faded into the quiet rhythm of the restaurant, but Sophia Bennett remained seated long after the plates around her had been cleared. The $20 bill still rested beside her untouched steak, its corner slightly lifted by the air from a passing waiter. The chair across from her was empty now, pushed back just enough to remind her how quickly someone could stand up and walk away from 10 years of marriage. A waiter approached carefully, his voice gentle as if he understood something uncomfortable had happened. He asked if she would like a box for the meal. Sophia shook her head slowly. The food had gone cold anyway. Outside the tall glass windows, Manhattan traffic flowed past in long lines of headlights and red brake lights stretching down the avenue. Life continued moving as if nothing had happened at that table. Sophia finally reached for the $20 bill. She looked at it for a moment, then folded it neatly and placed it on top of the check when the waiter returned. She paid the rest of the bill herself. When she stood up, the chair legs brushed softly against the wooden floor. No one at the table looked at her anymore. The show had ended and the audience had moved on. Sophia walked toward the door, each step steady, her heels tapping lightly against the floor. The cool night air met her. The moment she stepped onto the sidewalk, the city smelled faintly of rain and car exhaust, the distant sound of a taxi horn echoing down the street. She wrapped her coat a little tighter around herself as she started walking. For several blocks she did not call a taxi. She simply walked beneath the glow of streetlights, passing shop windows and quiet apartment buildings. In one reflection she caught sight of her own face staring back from the glass. For a brief second she remembered Ryan laughing at the table. "My wife is ugly." The words replayed in her mind, not as loud as before but still clear. She studied her reflection in the window longer than she expected. The woman looking back at her looked tired, yes, but not broken. When she finally reached their apartment building, the doorman greeted her with the same polite smile he had offered for years. "Good evening, Mrs. Bennet." Sophia paused slightly before answering. "Good evening." The elevator ride to the 21st floor felt unusually quiet. When the doors opened, the hallway lights cast long shadows along the carpet. She unlocked the apartment and stepped inside. The place still looked exactly the way it had that morning. Ryan's jacket hung over the back of the chair. His laptop bag rested near the couch. The television remote sat on the coffee table beside a half-finished glass of water. Everything about the room suggested someone would return soon. Sophia closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then she heard Ryan's voice from the bedroom. He was on the phone. His tone was relaxed, almost amused. "Yeah, I finally said it tonight," he said. "I told her straight to her face." There was a pause as the person on the other end responded. Ryan laughed softly. "No, she did not make a scene. That is the thing about Sophia. She never does." Another pause followed. "Yeah, I will file the divorce tomorrow. It is time. I cannot keep pretending." Sophia stood very still in the hallway as his words drifted through the partially open bedroom door. She did not interrupt. She did not step forward. She simply listened until the call ended and the room fell silent again. A few minutes later Ryan walked out, surprised to see her standing there. "Oh, you are back already," he said casually, as if the evening had been nothing more than an awkward dinner. Sophia looked at him calmly. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then Ryan shrugged slightly and walked past her toward the kitchen to pour himself a drink. Sophia turned her eyes toward the living room window where the lights of the city shimmered far below. Somewhere in the distance a siren echoed through the streets. She did not argue. She did not cry. She only understood one thing with quiet clarity. The life she had been living inside this apartment had just ended, and the next chapter of her story had already begun. The apartment remained quiet long after Ryan finished his drink in the kitchen. Ice clinked softly against the side of his glass while he leaned against the counter scrolling through his phone as if the evening had been ordinary. Sophia stood near the living room window watching the slow movement of traffic 21 floors below. Yellow taxis drifted through the intersections like small lights in a river of steel and concrete. The city never stopped moving, even when someone's life had just changed direction. Ryan eventually walked back into the living room and sat on the couch, turning on the television without looking at her. The low sound of a late-night sports broadcast filled the space between them. For years this had been their routine. Dinner, television, a few distracted conversations before bed. Only now the air felt different, like a room that had already been emptied even though the furniture remained. Sophia slowly took off her coat and placed it on the back of the chair. Her movements were calm, almost careful, as if she was afraid that any sudden motion might break the fragile silence holding the room together. Ryan glanced at her once, briefly, before returning his attention to the television screen. Finally he spoke with the same casual tone he used when discussing weekend plans. "I meant what I said earlier." Sophia nodded once. "I know." Ryan shrugged slightly, as if the conversation required no further explanation. "I think it is better this way. We have both changed." His words floated through the room without emotion. Sophia walked toward the bookshelf near the hallway, and ran her fingers lightly across the framed photograph sitting on the shelf. There was a wedding photo taken 10 years earlier. Ryan stood beside her in a navy suit, smiling confidently while she held a small bouquet of white roses. They looked younger in that photograph, hopeful in the way people often look before life rearranges their expectations. Next to it was a picture from a road trip through Colorado, taken beside a highway overlook where the mountains stretched for miles beneath a wide blue sky. Sophia remembered that day clearly. They had driven nearly 600 miles across the state in a rented car with the windows open and music playing through the speakers. Ryan had laughed easily back then. She set the frame back on the shelf. The memories felt distant now, like scenes from a film she had once watched but no longer recognized as her own life. Ryan muted the television and stood up. "I will sleep in the guest room tonight," he said, already walking down the hallway. Sophia did not respond. She listened to the quiet click of the guest room door closing. The apartment grew even quieter after that. For several minutes she remained where she was, looking around the living room that had once felt like the center of her world. Then she walked slowly into the bedroom they had shared for years. The closet light flickered on with a soft buzz. Ryan's side of the closet was filled with neatly pressed suits and expensive dress shirts, the kind he had started buying after his promotion at the investment firm 2 years earlier. Sophia looked at them for a moment before turning toward her own side of the closet. Her clothing was simpler. Comfortable sweaters, dresses she wore to small gatherings, a coat she had bought during their first winter in New York. She pulled a suitcase from the top shelf and placed it carefully on the bed. The zipper opened with a quiet sound in the still room. One by one she began folding her clothes and placing them inside. She did not rush. Every movement felt deliberate, like the closing of a chapter she had already accepted. Outside the bedroom window the lights of Manhattan continued glowing against the dark sky. Somewhere in the distance a train rumbled across a bridge. When the suitcase was finally half full, Sophia paused and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence around her no longer felt heavy. Instead it felt strangely clear, like the moment after a storm when the air becomes easier to breathe. She looked around the room one last time and realized something unexpected. The humiliation at the restaurant, the quiet conversation in the hallway, the empty feeling inside this apartment had not broken her the way Ryan probably expected. Instead it had done something else. It had removed the last reason for her to stay. Morning arrived quietly over Manhattan, the pale light of early dawn slipping between the tall buildings and spilling through the apartment windows. Sophia Bennett had not slept much, but the exhaustion she expected never came. Instead there was a strange sense of clarity in the quiet hours before sunrise. Her suitcase rested beside the bed, half full, the zipper still open where she had paused the night before. The city outside was already beginning to wake up. Distant traffic hummed along the avenues and somewhere below a delivery truck rolled over the uneven pavement. Sophia stood from the edge of the bed and walked to the window. 21 floors down, the streets looked smaller than they ever had before, like a map of a life she was about to leave behind. For several minutes she simply watched the sky grow lighter above the skyline. Then she turned back toward the room and continued packing. Each item she folded felt less like a loss and more like a quiet decision. A sweater she had worn on a cold winter evening. A pair of shoes she had once bought on a weekend trip downtown. None of it felt heavy anymore. In the kitchen she brewed a small cup of coffee, the familiar scent filling the apartment that had once felt like home. The clock on the wall read 6:15 in the morning. Ryan was still asleep in the guest room. Sophia sat at the kitchen table with the warm mug in her hands and looked around one last time. The cabinets, the counter, the small plant by the window. For years she had imagined growing older inside this apartment, building a life that slowly expanded around shared routines and quiet evenings. Now the space felt temporary, like a place she had only been passing through. When the coffee was finished, she rinsed the mug and placed it carefully in the sink. Then she returned to the bedroom and closed the zipper. On her suitcase, the sound was soft but final. She wheeled the suitcase into the hallway and paused beside the guest room door. For a moment she considered knocking, telling Ryan she was leaving, offering some final conversation to mark the end of 10 years together. But the thought passed quickly. Some endings did not require speeches. She picked up a small envelope from the table near the door and slipped a single sheet of paper inside. The note was short and simple. "I hope you find the life you were looking for." Sophia placed the envelope on the kitchen counter where Ryan would see it later. The hallway outside the apartment was empty when she stepped out, pulling the door closed behind her with a quiet click. The elevator arrived within seconds. As it descended floor by floor, Sophia watched the numbers change slowly above the door. 21, 20, 19. The lower the numbers went, the lighter she felt. When the doors opened in the lobby, the doorman looked up from behind his desk. He noticed the suitcase immediately. "Heading out early today, Mrs. Bennett," he said politely. Sophia smiled softly. "Just Sophia today," she replied. The morning air outside was cool and fresh against her face. The city looked different at this hour, calmer before the rush of the day began. A yellow taxi rolled slowly toward the curb and stopped when she raised her hand. The driver stepped out briefly to help place the suitcase in the trunk. "Where to, miss?" he asked as she slid into the back seat. Sophia looked through the window at the tall building behind her. The apartment on the 21st floor was invisible from the street now, just another row of windows reflecting the morning light. She took a quiet breath and gave the driver the address of a small neighborhood across the river in Brooklyn where a temporary rental apartment waited for her arrival. The taxi pulled away from the curb and merged into the early traffic crossing the bridge. As the skyline of Manhattan slowly drifted behind her, Sophia rested her head lightly against the seat and watched the city fade into the distance. For the first time in years, the road ahead belonged entirely to her. The small apartment in Brooklyn was quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar at first. The building stood on a narrow street lined with brownstone houses and small coffee shops that opened early for commuters heading toward the subway. When Sophia Bennett stepped inside the rental apartment for the first time, the space felt simple but peaceful. The living room had a single window facing the street, where soft morning light filtered through thin curtains and spilled across the wooden floor. A small couch rested against one wall, and a narrow table stood near the kitchen counter with two plain chairs. It was not large and it was not luxurious, but it was hers. The landlord had left the key in a small lockbox beside the door, just as he had promised over the phone. Sophia wheeled her suitcase inside and closed the door gently behind her. The quiet that followed was different from the silence in the apartment she had left behind. This silence felt open instead of heavy. For the first few minutes she simply stood near the window looking out at the street below. A man walked past with a paper coffee cup in his hand while a delivery driver stacked boxes outside a grocery store across the corner. Somewhere down the block a dog barked briefly before everything settled again into the calm rhythm of the neighborhood. Sophia placed her suitcase beside the couch and slowly walked through the apartment, taking in the details of a life that had not yet been lived. The kitchen counter was clean and empty except for a small stainless steel sink and a coffee maker that looked barely used. The bedroom held a narrow bed and a closet that echoed slightly when the door opened. It was not the kind of place that appeared in magazines, but it offered something she had not felt in a long time: space to begin again. Over the next few days Sophia started building small routines that belonged only to her. Each morning she walked 2 blocks to a neighborhood cafe where the owner greeted customers by name and played soft music from an old radio behind the counter. The cafe smelled like fresh coffee beans and warm pastries. Sophia would sit near the window with a simple breakfast and watch the neighborhood wake up around her. Some mornings she brought a notebook and wrote down thoughts she had not allowed herself to consider for years. Other days she simply sat quietly and listened to the sound of people beginning their day. No one in the cafe knew anything about her past. To them she was just another customer who liked her coffee black and always thanked the barista before leaving. In the afternoon Sophia began searching for work. She walked through nearby streets where small businesses lined the sidewalks, each window displaying something different. Flower shops with bright arrangements of roses and tulips. Bookstores filled with quiet corners and the smell of paper. Art galleries with tall glass windows revealing paintings that captured attention, even from across the street. One afternoon she paused in front of a small gallery that displayed modern artwork under soft lighting. The paintings were bold and thoughtful, each one telling a story without a single word. Sophia stood outside for several minutes studying the colors and shapes before finally stepping inside. The gallery was peaceful, almost silent except for the faint sound of classical music playing somewhere in the back room. A man behind the desk looked up briefly and smiled politely as she walked through the space. Sophia moved slowly from one painting to the next, reading the small descriptions printed beside each frame. For the first time in a long while she felt something awaken inside her, curiosity that had been buried beneath years of trying to keep a marriage from falling apart. She did not know it yet, but that quiet afternoon inside the gallery would soon change the direction of her life in ways she could not yet imagine. The small gallery remained quiet that afternoon, the kind of calm that allowed every footstep to echo softly across the polished wooden floor. Sophia Bennett moved slowly between the paintings, studying the colors and brushstrokes, as if each canvas held a hidden conversation waiting to be understood. Sunlight from the tall front windows stretched across the room, creating warm lines of light that shifted gently whenever someone passed outside on the sidewalk. The air carried a faint scent of fresh paint and clean wood, a smell that made the space feel alive without being crowded. Sophia paused in front of a large abstract painting filled with deep blue and gold shapes that seemed to move across the canvas like waves under moonlight. She tilted her head slightly as she read the small description card beside it. The artist had written that the piece represented the feeling of standing at the edge of change, that quiet moment when life begins turning in a new direction, even before anyone notices. The words made her smile softly. For a long moment she simply stood there, letting the meaning settle somewhere deeper than the surface of the painting. From the back of the gallery a calm voice spoke. It is interesting how people see something different in that one. Sophia turned slightly. A tall man in a dark coat stood near the desk she had passed earlier. He did not approach quickly or interrupt her space. Instead he remained where he was, observing the room with a relaxed posture that suggested patience. Sophia looked back at the painting. What do most people see in it, she asked. The man walked forward slowly, stopping beside her but keeping a respectful distance. Some say it looks like the ocean at night, he replied. Others say it feels like a storm that has not started yet. He glanced at the canvas again. Personally, I think it looks like the moment right before someone changes their life. Sophia studied the painting again and then looked at him with quiet curiosity. That sounds very specific, she said. The man gave a small smile. Art usually is. There was something calm about the way he spoke, something thoughtful that made the conversation feel natural, even though they had just met. He introduced himself as Alexander Hayes. His voice carried the smooth confidence of someone used to speaking carefully, but there was no arrogance in his tone. Sophia introduced herself in return. Alexander nodded politely and asked if she visited galleries often. Sophia shook her head. Not really. This is actually the first one I have walked into in a long time. Alexander glanced around the room. Then you chose a good one to start with, he said. The owner has a talent for finding artists who paint emotions instead of objects. They walked slowly through the rest of the gallery together, pausing occasionally in front of different paintings. Sophia found herself explaining what she liked about certain colors or shapes, surprised by how easily the words came to her. Alexander listened more than he spoke, asking small questions that encouraged her to keep sharing her thoughts. By the time they reached the final painting near the back wall, nearly half an hour had passed without either of them noticing. Outside, the afternoon sun had shifted lower, casting long shadows across the sidewalk beyond the glass windows. Alexander checked the time briefly and then looked back toward Sophia. There is a charity event next week hosted by an art foundation in Manhattan, he said thoughtfully. It supports young painters who cannot afford to exhibit their work yet. He paused before continuing. If you enjoy conversations like this, you might find the evening interesting. Sophia considered his words for a moment. The idea of returning to Manhattan so soon after leaving felt unexpected, yet the invitation carried no pressure in the way he offered it. It simply felt like an open door. She looked once more at the painting beside them and then back at Alexander. That does sound interesting, she said quietly. Alexander reached into the inside pocket of his coat and handed her a small card with a date and location printed in elegant lettering. The foundation would be honored to have you attend, he said. Sophia accepted the card, studying the address for a brief second before slipping it carefully into her bag. As she stepped outside the gallery a few minutes later, the air on the street felt slightly cooler, and the late afternoon light reflected warmly across the windows of the surrounding buildings. She walked slowly toward the corner cafe, unaware that the simple invitation now resting inside her bag would soon lead her back into the very world she thought she had left behind. The week passed quietly, but the small card inside Sophia Bennett's bag seemed to carry a quiet weight every time she noticed it. During the morning she continued her routine at the neighborhood cafe, sitting by the same window where sunlight touched the wooden table, and the smell of roasted coffee filled the air. Yet now her mind wandered occasionally to the invitation Alexander Hayes had given her. Manhattan had once been the center of her life, a place filled with memories she had only recently walked away from. The thought of returning even for a single evening felt strange, like stepping back into a room she had carefully closed behind her. Still, the idea stayed with her through the days that followed. On the evening of the event, Sophia stood in the small bedroom of her Brooklyn apartment studying her reflection in the mirror. The room was simple and quiet, the soft light from a small lamp resting on the dresser beside her. She had chosen a dark blue dress that she had not worn in years, one that had been tucked away in her suitcase since the morning she left the apartment in Manhattan. The fabric was elegant but understated, the kind of dress that did not demand attention yet carried quiet confidence. She brushed her hair back gently and took a slow breath. For a moment she wondered if she was ready to walk into a world that once felt so familiar. But something about the past few weeks had changed her in ways she could not fully explain. The woman who had left that restaurant months earlier had carried humiliation and silence like heavy shadows. The woman standing in the mirror now felt steadier, as if the quiet life she had begun building in Brooklyn had slowly restored something inside her. Outside her window the evening sky had already turned deep shades of purple and gold as the sun slipped behind the skyline of Manhattan across the river. Sophia picked up her small handbag and stepped out of the apartment, locking the door behind her before walking down the narrow staircase to the street. The ride across the bridge took less than 20 minutes, yet the view of the city rising ahead of her still carried a strange familiarity. Tall buildings glowed with thousands of lights and traffic moved steadily along the avenues below. The taxi eventually stopped in front of a grand building near Central Park, where soft golden lights illuminated the entrance and a line of black cars waited along the curb. Men in tailored suits and women in elegant dresses walked up the steps toward the large glass doors while quiet conversations drifted through the evening air. Sophia stepped out of the taxi and paused briefly on the sidewalk. The building before her felt worlds away from the small cafe in Brooklyn and the peaceful gallery where she had first met Alexander Hayes. Yet she did not feel the nervousness she expected. Instead she felt calm, as if she were simply stepping into another chapter of the same story that had begun changing weeks earlier. Inside the ballroom soft music floated through the air while guests moved between tall displays of artwork arranged around the room. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling reflecting across polished marble floors and long tables filled with glasses and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Sophia walked slowly through the entrance, taking in the quiet elegance of the space. For a few moments she simply observed the room, the conversations, the laughter that rose and faded beneath the music. Then as she turned slightly toward the far side of the ballroom her eyes stopped suddenly. Standing near one of the art displays was a man she recognized instantly even from across the crowded room. Ryan Bennett had not changed much. He wore the same confident posture she remembered, dressed in a tailored suit while speaking casually with several people beside him. A woman stood at his side, laughing softly at something he had just said. Sophia remained still for a brief moment as the distance between the past and present seemed to collapse inside that single room. Ryan had not seen her yet, but in only a few seconds that was about to change. For a moment Sophia Bennett remained still near the entrance of the ballroom, the quiet hum of conversations and soft music surrounding her like distant waves. Across the room Ryan Bennett continued speaking with the small group beside him, unaware that the past he had left behind was now standing only 30 feet away. Sophia studied him calmly. The months that had passed since the night at the restaurant had softened the sharp edge of that memory, yet seeing him again still carried a strange weight. Ryan laughed at something the woman beside him said. The same confident laugh she remembered so clearly. The woman on his arm wore a bright silver dress and held his arm with the easy familiarity of someone who believed she belonged there. Sophia did not feel anger watching them. Instead she felt something quieter, something closer to distance. Ryan finally turned his head slightly and his eyes moved across the room. For a second his gaze passed over the guests without recognition. Then it stopped. His expression shifted almost instantly as he realized who he was looking at. Surprise flickered across his face before quickly being replaced by the confident smile he often used when entering any social room. He said something brief to the group beside him and began walking toward her. His steps relaxed as if this were a coincidence he found amusing. Sophia did not move. The light from the crystal fixtures above reflected softly across the polished floor between them as Ryan approached. When he stopped a few feet away he looked her up and down briefly, clearly taking in the dark blue dress and the calm expression on her face. "Well, this is unexpected," he said with a small chuckle. "I did not know you attended events like this now." His tone carried the same casual arrogance she remembered from the night everything ended. Sophia met his eyes calmly. "Good evening, Ryan," she replied. Ryan glanced around the ballroom before leaning slightly closer, lowering his voice as though sharing a private joke. "You always did like art galleries and quiet places like this," he said. But these events are usually invitation only. His smile widened slightly. I am guessing someone brought you as a guest. Sophia said nothing. Ryan looked briefly toward the entrance and then back at her again. Still living in Brooklyn, he asked casually. I heard you moved across the river after everything. The woman in the silver dress had now followed him across the room and stood beside him with curious eyes. Ryan placed a relaxed arm around her shoulder. This is Olivia, he said lightly. She works in marketing with our firm. Olivia offered a polite but slightly amused smile. Ryan turned his attention back to Sophia with the same faint smirk. Anyway, it is good to see you doing well, he continued. I suppose everyone eventually finds their place again. His words floated in the air between them for a brief moment. Sophia remained completely calm, her posture steady as she looked toward the far side of the ballroom where several people had begun gathering near the stage. Before she could respond, the soft music in the room slowly faded and the lights above the stage brightened slightly. A voice from the microphone gently called the attention of the guests. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight in support of emerging artists across the country. Conversations around the room gradually quieted as people turned toward the stage. Ryan glanced over his shoulder, clearly expecting the evening program to begin. The host continued speaking warmly about the foundation and the importance of supporting creativity. Sophia remained still beside Ryan and Olivia as the guests listened. Then the host smiled and continued with a different tone of anticipation. Tonight we are honored to have our primary benefactor with us, the man whose generosity made this event possible. Several guests near the front began clapping politely. Ryan nodded with mild interest, still unaware of what was about to happen. The host lifted his hand toward the side of the stage. Please join me in welcoming the founder of Hayes Global and the chairman of the Hayes Art Foundation, Mr. Alexander Hayes. At that exact moment, Ryan's expression changed as the man Sophia had met quietly inside the Brooklyn Gallery stepped calmly onto the stage. The moment Alexander Hayes stepped onto the stage, the entire ballroom shifted almost imperceptibly. Conversation stopped, glasses paused halfway to lips, and the quiet attention of hundreds of guests turned toward the tall man standing beneath the warm lights. He carried himself with calm confidence, the kind that did not need to demand attention because the room naturally offered it. Ryan Bennett's relaxed posture stiffened slightly beside Sophia as recognition flashed across his face. His eyes moved from the stage back to Sophia, and then returned again to Alexander as if trying to understand something that did not yet make sense. Olivia looked at Ryan with curiosity. Do you know him? She whispered softly. Ryan did not answer right away. On the stage, Alexander waited for the applause to settle before speaking, his voice steady and warm as it carried through the ballroom. Thank you all for being here tonight, he said. Art has a way of reminding us that change often begins quietly, long before anyone else notices. His words drifted across the room with thoughtful calm. Sophia listened from where she stood only a few steps away from Ryan. The moment felt strangely peaceful, like the closing scene of a story she had once believed would end very differently. Alexander spoke for several minutes about the artists whose work filled the gallery displays around the room, and about the importance of supporting creativity in a world that often rushed past quiet things. When he finished, the audience applauded again with genuine appreciation. Then Alexander glanced briefly toward the crowd. His gaze moved across the room until it stopped. For a second, Ryan did not realize who Alexander was looking at. But Sophia did. A small smile touched Alexander's expression before he stepped down from the stage and began walking calmly through the guests toward her. The distance between them slowly closed as people respectfully stepped aside. Ryan watched the approach with growing confusion. When Alexander finally reached Sophia, he greeted her with the same calm warmth she had first noticed in the gallery weeks earlier. I am glad you came tonight, Sophia, he said. I was hoping you would enjoy the event. Sophia returned the smile gently. It is beautiful here, she replied. Thank you for inviting me. Ryan blinked in disbelief as the conversation unfolded directly in front of him. Alexander turned his attention toward Ryan and Olivia with polite curiosity. Sophia noticed Ryan struggling to gather his composure. Alexander extended his hand politely. Good evening, he said. I am Alexander Hayes. Ryan shook his hand automatically, still trying to process the connection forming in front of him. Ryan Bennett, he replied. Alexander nodded slightly. It is nice to meet you. Sophia glanced at Ryan calmly, her expression unchanged. For the first time since the evening began, Ryan seemed unsure of what to say. His earlier confidence had faded into something quieter, something closer to realization. Olivia looked between the three of them, sensing the tension without understanding the history behind it. Alexander turned back toward Sophia and offered his arm in a simple, respectful gesture. Would you like to see the new exhibition room upstairs? He asked. The artists have just finished setting it up. Sophia accepted the gesture without hesitation. I would like that very much, she said. Together they began walking across the ballroom toward the staircase at the far side of the hall. The soft music had returned and conversation slowly resumed around them, but Ryan remained standing in the same place watching the two figures move away through the crowd. For a brief moment Sophia glanced back over her shoulder. Her eyes met Ryan's across the room. She did not speak. She did not need to. Then she turned forward again and continued walking beside Alexander Hayes while the lights of the ballroom shimmered quietly around them, and the past finally settled behind her like a door that had gently closed.